Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because, well, we're setting off on a truly mind-bending journey into the geometry of music. Seriously, if you've ever wondered why certain chords just make you feel this deep sense of longing, or why a simple melody can suddenly send shivers down your spine when it's played just a little bit differently, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're unpacking the architecture of negative harmony.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to take a second and just imagine your absolute favorite song. You know every single note, every beat, every word, but now imagine you're hearing it broadcast from an alternate reality. It's not the opposite of your favorite song. It doesn't suddenly sound terrible, and it's not being played in reverse. Instead, it's highly recognizable, yet strangely, beautifully different. The whole emotional weight of it has shifted, and you know this wild sensation isn't magic. It's an actual structural music concept. Section 1. The musical mirror image, stepping through the looking glass.
To really get this concept, we have to realize that music is fundamentally built on relationships. A melody isn't just some random bucket of notes, and a chord isn't just a messy pile of sounds, right? What gives music its beating heart, its emotion, is the relationship between those tones. Which notes feel stable and like home, and which ones feel tense, kind of pulling you forward. And this brilliantly illustrates the core of our topic. Think of traditional harmony as a familiar, emotional journey. Now imagine looking at a beautiful painting in a mirror. Flipping that painting doesn't destroy the colors. It doesn't ruin the shapes at all, but it completely changes the spatial relationships of everything inside the frame. Well, negative harmony does exactly this, but with musical chords. It takes the harmonic structure that creates an emotional journey and literally flips the relationships between the notes around a central axis. As one expert brilliantly highlights, the easiest way to imagine it is not as an opposite song, but as an alternate reality version of the same song. When you apply negative harmony to a piece of music, a traditionally happy, upbeat song might suddenly become deeply mysterious. A warm, comforting chord progression might just become haunting. You get this absolutely incredible sensation of hearing something you intimately recognize, but with its emotional meaning completely shifted. Section 2. How the theory works. The mechanics of the flip. Now don't worry, we're not going to get bogged down in pages of complex sheet music here. We're going to break down the actual math and structure behind this musical mirror so you can see exactly how the engine runs under the hood. But to understand negative harmony, we first need a really quick baseline of ordinary Western harmony. Let's look at the key of C major. In this key, the note C is your tonal center, your stable home base. And music works because of the expectations created around this home base. For example, the note G creates a very specific tension that makes your ear want to return to C. F creates a completely different kind of movement, pulling back to C. Meanwhile, notes like E and A, they act kind of like the paint on the canvas, providing emotional color. Everything is relative to that home note.
So negative harmony takes those established expectations and literally reflects them. It does this by creating an invisible line, an axis. A super common method is to draw this axis perfectly between the tonic, which is our home note C, and the dominant, which is our tension note G. Once you have that center point, you take all the notes in your song and just mirror them mathematically right across that axis. When you reflect notes across that axis, an amazing transformation happens. Because of the math involved, major chords will often become minor chords, and minor chords will often become major chords. A chord that used to provide a really specific type of tension transforms into a completely different flavor of tension. But here is the most fascinating part. The structural shape of the music survives. We aren't just reversing the notes willy-nilly, we are reversing the relationships between the notes. The emotional polarity changes, but the core architecture remains totally intact. So the crucial point is, why on earth do we call it negative? The term itself sounds a bit ominous, right? It kind of sounds like we're talking about something destructive or dark or maybe the soundtrack for a movie villain. This name alone has caused a massive amount of confusion online, so let's clear it up right now.
The word negative here absolutely does not mean bad, and it certainly doesn't mean evil. It's simply a mathematical metaphor for flipping orientation. Think back to grade school math for a second. A negative number isn't a bad version of a number, it just exists on the exact opposite side of zero. Positive 5 and negative 5 are perfect reflections of each other across that center point. Negative harmony works with that exact same logic. It's really just like flipping a photograph horizontally. Left just becomes right.
Let's look at this fantastic analogy. Imagine walking through a dense forest. Traditional harmony is one specific path winding through the trees.
Negative harmony creates a mathematically reflected path on the exact other side of an invisible mirror. If you walk that reflected path, you still recognize the forest. You still know exactly where you are, and you recognize the types of trees around you. But the journey itself, the way the light hits the leaves, it feels completely unfamiliar.
Section 3. What negative harmony is not. Debunking the myths.
Because this concept has a cool, admittedly slightly spooky name, there's been a lot of wild internet hype surrounding it. People have jumped to a lot of crazy conclusions about what this theory actually does, so we need to systematically knock down the most common misconceptions. Now, what's really interesting about this is how simple the truth actually is. First off, negative harmony doesn't just automatically make a song minor and sad. Second, it is definitely not playing the audio file backwards. It's also not some hidden, secret musical system that unlocks the universe, nor is it an evil version of a song. I mean, a chord progression has no moral quality. Ultimately, negative harmony is just a tool. It's exactly like using a distortion pedal on a guitar or tuning a violin differently. It's just a creative choice.
I absolutely love this quote from our source material because it perfectly captures the experience. The listener recognizes the skeleton but experiences a different emotional body. Since the melody and the rhythm usually remain completely unchanged, your brain recognizes the skeleton of the song instantly. But because harmony dictates the emotional meaning, that skeleton is suddenly wearing a totally different emotional body. And that is exactly how a triumphant victory march can suddenly feel like a mysterious, unsolved puzzle.
Section 4. Why it sounds mysterious. The psychology of the sound.
So we've talked about the math and the theory, but let's take a second to talk about the human mind. Why do our brains naturally interpret these mirrored alternate reality relationships as dark, nostalgic, or deeply unsettling? Well, humans are incredibly sensitive to patterns. When we hear a song we know, our brain is constantly predicting the next note. Negative harmony creates this really fascinating psychological conflict. Your logical brain says, oh, I recognize this pattern completely, but your emotional system is basically sounding an alarm, saying, wait, something has fundamentally changed here. It's exactly like seeing a very close friend, but they're sitting in a strange, dimly lit, completely unexpected room. It's organized, it's familiar, but the context creates a really powerful, mysterious tension.
Section 5. Let's move to and see how this builds into the power of familiarity. Creative magic in action.
Once you understand that this psychological tension exists, you start to see how incredibly useful it is. Modern artists, songwriters, and composers actively use this tension to their advantage. They aren't just doing math equations for fun. They're using negative harmony to manipulate our emotions on purpose. Film composers are absolute masters of this. Have you ever watched a movie where a hero slowly turns into a villain, or a beautiful fantasy world slowly becomes corrupted? Composers will often take the hero's upbeat theme music and run it straight through negative harmony. The audience subconsciously recognizes the pattern. They know it's the hero's theme, but the shifted emotional polarity tells them a hidden truth is being revealed. It leaves the listener perfectly balanced on a tightrope between the world they know and the world reflected back at them.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. We often think of music just as the notes being played. But what if the magic is entirely in the empty space between the notes? Think about the music that moves you the most. Could negative harmony, this mathematical flipping of relationships, explain why some songs feel deeply nostalgic, yet strangely unsettling? The next time you hear a cover song that completely changes the mood of the original, ask yourself, are you just hearing different notes, or have you just stepped through the musical looking glass? Thank you so much for exploring the architecture of harmony with me in this explainer. Keep listening and keep wondering.